Hi everyone, and hi Rupert. Rupert, thank you so much for your suggestion about sights. I receive all kinds of requests, but they almost always have something to do with guns and like a particular rifle or shotgun or what have you. And I thought that's a pretty smart idea to talk about sights, and in particular aperture sights. So I did what I could, and I think you probably saw a few sites on the table, and I brought out those sites, and I thought I'll just speak generally to everyone about shooting with iron sights. Most people now are a little bit removed from iron sights because quite a few factory guns don't even have iron sights these days. But if you look at a Garand or the ARs, you'll see an aperture or a peep sight. So you're effectively looking through a circle. And the way our eyes and brains work, we naturally center the front sight in that circle without thinking about it. You look through the aperture sight or the aperture itself. And the aperture can be quite small for target shooting, or it can be larger for hunting or other applications. So I took out a few of these sights, as I just said, and before I get into that, I thought I seem to be getting messages from quite a few young shooters, so I thought, out of respect for them, I'd try to explain the perils of shooting with iron sights, because it's so easy to miss. So I went into one of my books, and I was lucky, and this is actually, I'm not sure how this will all work, but we'll try. This is actually obviously not an aperture sight. These are typical iron sights. So this is the way I was trained to shoot. A lot of people will cover the target, especially young shooters. And when you cover the target, of course, it's hard to see what's going on. So a 6 o'clock hold is ideal, and you can see the space here is balanced with the space here, and that's the front sight, and that's the notch rear sight here. And this could be a V shape, this, or it could be a U shape, it doesn't matter. The concept you can transfer to whatever iron sights you have. So with the 6 o'clock hold, you really don't obscure the target. And buckhorn sights are often criticized because they cover the target, but you can actually use them in much the same way and use the frame of the buckhorn to, in a way, encircle the target. And I don't know, I never had problem with the buckhorn. Even the full buckhorn, I kind of used them like aperture sights. Some of you may understand that, and some may not. Anyway, what they show here, this is quite useful, is what happens if this is not level here, then you shoot low. Here's what happens with canting. Here's what happens when you put the front sight too high. And then on the next page, if this space is less and this space is more, which happens in a heartbeat, that's where you hit. Canting again, and space bigger here, less here, you hit over here. Now these are all presented as errors in shooting, and they are errors in probably aiming is a better way to put it. But it doesn't, when you shoot a lot, you can use some of these principles to actually hit better, especially this one. I frequently, when a gun is shooting high or low, I'll use the front sight blade to raise or lower elevation without changing, without adjusting my sights. And you might have heard this expression, take a fine bead, or take a coarse bead. So this would mean coarse, would mean the front sight blade wouldn't be flush with the top of the rear sight. And this one I use quite often because for some reason some guns come from the factory and they shoot very low. So I had some people write me actually about Springfields and other guns, and they couldn't get them to shoot higher no matter what they did adjusting their sights. So here's another alternative. You can just put your front sight blade higher and still use the 6 o'clock hold and figure out, you know, what's what. And anyway, I don't know if that made sense, but after you shoot for a while, it does make sense. So the reason I'm showing you this is I'm trying to demonstrate that a lot of things go wrong, and with iron sights. Now you can see this is handgun shooting. It just happened to be that in this book this was the best section. It could say rifle shooting. Maybe it wouldn't look exactly like this. It doesn't matter. So then I went to the Aperture side, and a lot of the older Aperture sights cover quite a bit of the target, so you have a very narrow field of view. But this is a good example of what they call ghost ring. And in a ghost ring sight, this actually virtually disappears. You're like I said, your brain and your eyes automatically center the front bead. Looks like some kind of poor rodent here. Anyway, and you don't see this generally. I never do. And now it's different if you're, shooting targets. Then you actually can have front sights that are tailored to the target. But that's another subject. Anyway, that's the best I could do to explain aperture or peep sight with conventional iron sights. And I actually like iron sights. A rifle with iron sights, it's handy. There's nothing hanging above the rifle, and I know in poor light iron sights are not the best, but in fairness to the centuries of people that used iron sights and didn't miss much, I thought this is a good idea. So anyway, we'll just close this book. It's a pretty beaten up book, but anyway, and now Rupert, I thought I'd just walk everybody through. So this is a typical Williams sight. You might recognize this. This is one of my favorite 22s. It's a Browning T-bolt, and the sight is affixed here. You can on the side of the action. You can adjust it for windage, elevation, and again, a completely thought-free sighting system. You just look through the aperture, put the front sight bead, which is a typical front sight in this case. It really isn't even a bead, it's flat. And if you can figure out that 6 o'clock hold, it's virtually effortless aiming and shooting. Keep both eyes open, or at least I do. Just look through the aperture and that works fine. So that's the Williams that goes from the side. Now this one, I think Rupert, you caught this on my table here. So these sights, I first started encountering these Sako or Seiko, depending on who's correcting me, sights, and I immediately thought this is an amazingly well-made sight. So whenever I run into them, I buy them. Sometimes people don't know what they have and you pay $25. Sometimes they know what they have and you pay more. They're adjustable. They are wonderful. They sit on the action. Now in this case, this is a small Sako action, so it slides on a dovetail. And actually, if you look at the groups, you'll find that the aperture is, in many cases, more accurate, or anyway, the group is smaller with the aperture sight. So these, I always recommend them, and these are the things you have to get if you want to use these Sakos. You have to get these little pieces, but they're around at gun shows and probably wouldn't be too hard to make them. See, this is what attaches to your receiver, and then the sight slides onto those shapes, and I'm just showing you the different configurations of the bottoms. And you can take the apertures out. For hunting, I recommend you use a big aperture. Your eye still centers everything. Actually, I didn't notice much difference between the so-called super fine aperture and the hunting aperture. Your eye centers everything. You don't need to think about it. You don't have anything. There's no red dot. There's nothing. It's just a function, I guess, of our brain. So the Sako is fantastic. And then there were Lymans. There were Redfields. This is an old Springfield Sporter. Nowadays everybody's buying whatever they're buying, but maybe 40 or 50 years ago, this would have been a first-class hunting rig. It's a Springfield 1903. The serial number is not too low, so the heat treating is right. You could look all that up. It's a Remington. No, this is a Springfield Armory action. And beautiful stocking. I couldn't bring myself to to remove the aperture sight. I just left it on. Somebody wanted me to put a scope on this, couldn't do it. As you can see, the rear sight, and this is actually quite a quality rear sight base, is just filled with a blank because you don't need it. Oh, and that's the other thing. With the aperture sight, you typically have a longer sighting plane, which gives you still more accuracy. The distance between the front sight and the rear sight determines, in large measure, how accurate your shooting is going to be, which is why with pistols, you just move your hand 1 millimeter and your shot is like 5 feet to the left or right. But I'm sure you all know about that. So now this one's mounted on the right side of the receiver. And then I took out this one just because, now I'll contradict myself as usual. This is a Tally aperture sight, and this is made so beautifully. I actually couldn't believe that they made this sight. I'll just set it down here in this day and age. It's all steel, wonderfully fitted. Now when you see this, you'll wonder what's going on with elevation and where do you adjust for windage, because these bases are fixed bases. So I can adjust the front sight to some extent, but what I did in this case was, before I got this all set up, I more or less, using super glue, made sure that everything was perfect, so I was on. Then I mounted the bases, and I was lucky I got away with it. It's right on, so I don't need to adjust anything. And actually it would be tricky if I was wrong. No, you could still adjust using the front sight. Anyhow, and you understand that, right? You can adjust for windage and elevation on the rear sight or the front just by changing the blade and left or right on the blade. And then for final proof of the excellence of these aperture sights, here's the legendary Garand or Garand, and I try to say all pronunciations because it seems no matter which one I say, there are people that think otherwise, and that's a good thing. Anyway, this one is so easily adjusted for windage and elevation using these turrets, and I don't know how many of you have had a chance to shoot a Garand, but this is a remarkable rifle, and it's just a fantastic experience. Of course, it's heavy, there's no doubt about it. But anyway, this particular video is about aperture sights, not about the weight of the guns. So I'm not sure how much more I can say. If you go and look at biathlon rifles, or you go and look at 1,000-yard target rifles, you find aperture sights, and scopes have the advantage of optics, but I can tell you, I've done shooting. You know, I'm no star target shooter, and don't pretend to be. But at long range, the aperture sights, they don't have any heat distortion. When you try to magnify something, you get heat waves and all kinds. There are things that happen that actually, in some cases, open up the groups. Now, people will say, but there are no snipers with just aperture sights, and that is absolutely true. I'm just saying, for target shooting where the bull size is defined and known, and you know the aperture, and your front sight frames that target, it's surprising how small the groups can be, even at 1,000 yards. I probably should have a Lee Enfield on the table and a few other guns, Rupert, but I don't have a big enough table. So anyway, I hope I covered that subject. Oh, last thing, hidden in this box. This is one of my favorite sights too. Doesn't look like much, but these Skinner sights, that's one sight. Oh, it goes the other way. Anyway, it doesn't matter. That's made by a company called Skinner, and you can take that knurled section off and you have a ghost ring sight. They're small, they're light. You can raise them and lower them. You can move the front sight left to right or whatever you want to do. Excellent, inexpensive, supreme machining, just a fantastic sight. And I don't even think that was very expensive. So if you get stuck and you're just fed up with having like a blimp or some monstrous scope on your gun, you just want to get back to just pick up your rifle and go, I invite you to try an aperture sight. You'll be you'd be shocked. Oh, this doesn't look special, but this base is machined for a Ruger 77. This is for a Mauser, so you can see the different shapes. This is one of the old Tang sights. I almost shut down the video without talking about those. Remarkable sights that went on the Tang or on the wrist. I've seen them all over, actually, different locations of lever actions, the old Winchesters, but I find them on 1885 single shots, all kinds of guns, and again, astonishing accuracy. If you're getting them, I've seen a few people put them too close to their eyes, and it doesn't go well. Keep it a little bit forward. It's tempting to have them really close to your eye, but on recoil, sometimes they move and unexpected things happen. Anyhow, I hope that's useful information for you, and definitely young shooters, before you go to the monstrous scope, try those Aperture sights. It leads to what I call instinctive shooting. You don't think about shooting, and you can hit aerial targets, all kinds of things you would never think are possible with these Aperture sights. Anyhow, as always, I hope that's useful and somehow educational, and thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time.